For every fan and partaker of sports, there can be an equal number of definitions for what sports can represent. Whether it be self expression, inspiration, or enjoying it for feats of human achievement, sports can help us in our everyday lives in a multitude of different ways. But in some cases, sports can be even greater than the game itself. Any fan of basketball should be well aware of Lithuania's extraordinary talent pool. Since the country's re-independence struggles in the early 1990s, there have been 15 players from the small Baltic nation to put on an NBA jersey.
But for Lithuanians, the game means so much more. It's not just about scoring the most points, it symbolizes something more historic than meets the eye. This is the history of Lithuanian national basketball team and how the game helped the small nation become accepted by the Western world, which it always felt it belonged to.
After World War I, the nation declared independence again and began operating as a sovereign nation. During the time between 1918 and World War II, it defended itself from constant attacks on its property by surrounding opponents and adopted permanent constitutions in 1922, also establishing all major public institutions. But another development started to take place. After losing their first ever international game to the American coached Latvia in 1925, it took the Lithuanians only 7 years to establish the Lithuanian Basketball Federation, and just 5 years after that to capture gold in the European Championships, repeating as champion 2 years later. These two aforementioned European gold medals can largely be traced back to the godfather of Lithuanian basketball, as he's called, Pranas Lubinas, an American basketball player born to Lithuanian immigrants who returned to Lithuania as a player coach for the national team. Lubinas taught and laid the foundation for a basketball factory that is still strong today.
However, in 1939, when the Soviet Union seized the Baltic nations and other surrounding ethnic groups, the relationship between the Baltic people and Soviet government remained and constantly grew toxic. During the occupation, Lithuania saw most of its national culture oppressed. Decisions regarding their country and others were made through centralized power, which used any means to legitimize their power and ultimately exiled at least 130,000 Lithuanians to labor camps and other forced settlements in the far regions of Soviet Union. Even though Lithuania was suffering and had a turbulent political and economical situation, the nation still felt a strong connection to one sport, basketball. In order to analyze basketball's role in Lithuanian national identity, it must first be emphasized that while the country was under foreign occupation, Lithuanians never gave up their national culture. To quote Lithuanian American historian Vytautas Kavolis, culture is everything that is meaningful to a human being. For Lithuanians, one of these things was basketball.
In describing the Lithuanian experience, postcolonialism becomes the best idea or theory that can be used to explain the Soviet state and its relationship with the breakaway republics. Postcolonialism is the critical academic study of the cultural, political, and economic legacy of colonialism and imperialism, focusing on the impact of human control and exploitation of colonized people and their lands. While the Soviet Union was not a colonialist state in the classical sense, the forms of power and dominance resemble those of colonial states around the world, having plundered and suppressed the Lithuanian people for many decades and converted Lithuania's natural resources, land, and human capital to its use for those number of decades. The Soviet Union only impoverished Lithuania and dominated her as a nation, to the point where Lithuania and the other Soviet republics could not take municipal decisions without the involvement of Moscow. One of the key themes of postcolonialism is that Western perceptions of the non-West are a result of legacies of European colonialism and imperialism. But in the case of Lithuania and the other Baltic states, the colonial states felt like they belonged within that Western perception and that the Soviet occupation was a disturbance of the status quo, a comfortable claim for gaining international approval, as stated by Epanos, an Estonian scholar.
The aforementioned influence of American coaching was still prevalent during the Soviet reign in Lithuania. The nation pumped out several talented players and became a powerhouse in basketball with its own playing style and school. Eventually, young Lithuanian players got so good that Kaunas Žalgiris, the most decorated Lithuanian club, competed strongly against CSKA Moscow, the club representing the Red Army. For Lithuanians, the matches between CSKA and Žalgiris were more than just a great rivalry. These matchups generated great public attention and even led to public anti-Soviet demonstrations. According to the Arnas Bakula, a journalist and a future LKL employee, we felt like a country that had been invaded. We didn't have any firearms. Basketball was our only opportunity to compete against the Soviets. To add, Lithuanian President Valdas Adamkus once stated that during the 50 years of the occupation, basketball was an expression of freedom. The entire country was trying to beat the Russians and to show that we were superior in that respect. The game reflected our will to win against our oppressors and sustained our hope and resolve. Žalgiris defeated CSKA for the Soviet Championship each year from 1985 until 1987.
With the Lithuanian players developing at an immense pace, it should not come as a surprise that the Soviet Union recruited many of them to represent the country in international competitions. Of course, this meant that many Lithuanian players were major contributors, but rarely got the sufficient recognition for their play. In 1972, the Soviet national team captured its first Olympic gold, with legendary Lithuanian player Modestas Paulauskas captaining the squad. After a few relatively down years of winning bronze medals, the Soviets again climbed the Olympic mountain in 1988. It should be noted that the majority of that particular Soviet squad was made up of players born in different Soviet republics. 4 of the 12 players on that team were Lithuanian. The USSR met with the United States men's basketball team, the favorites of the tournament, in the semifinals. Until that point, the United States had not dropped a single game. A shock to many people, the Soviet Union's team came out as the winner with a score of 82-76, with Lithuanian players Rimas Kurtinaitis and Arvydas Sabonis being the most notable players of the game. The Soviet Union won gold with a 76-63 victory over Yugoslavia, with Marciulionis and Sabonis leading the team.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union, Lithuania redeclared its independence on March 11, 1990. It was a country without diplomatic ties to the West, risking everything, including losing the lives of its citizens in the hands of the Soviets. In saving the situation amidst the terror that had ensued, the U.S. Congress acted quickly to end economic assistance to the Soviet Union. This action was not pleasant for Gorbachev, as such actions grossly wounded his powers. By December 1991, about 11 of the Soviet Socialist republics had proclaimed their independence and established the Commonwealth of Independent States. A few days after these actions by the newly established Commonwealth, Gorbachev resigned as president and what was left of the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Lithuania had to make a quick transformation toward Western capitalism, privatizing government-owned real estate and commercial spaces in an effort to bring in foreign investment. The country also signed a partnership with the state of Pennsylvania as part of the U.S. European Common State Partnership. By 1990, the Lithuanian national basketball team exhibited cultural importance owing to restrictions a good number of them had experienced during the long years of Soviet rule. They symbolized a generational team that sought to raise awareness about its native orientations, value systems, and ethics. With the country going through hard times after an economic blockade among many measures implemented by Soviet Union, basketball was not on anyone's mind until an invite from the Soviet Union national team landed in the mailboxes of Marciulionis and Sabonis to represent the country in 1990 Goodwill Games, taking place in July and August the same year. Lithuanian basketball players were still part of the roster submitted by the USSR to US basketball. However, with Marciulionis and Sabonis being the leaders, the Lithuanian players went forward with a mild protest, refusing to play for the Soviets. While basketball had been a major part of Lithuanian culture in the past, this point can be marked as the revival. Along with the Reformation, Marciulionis and Sabonis, Valdemaras Chomicius and Rimas Kurtinaitis expressed a sincere desire to represent their home country again. They wrote a letter to Goodwill Games founder and television entrepreneur Ted Turner, asking to permit Lithuania to compete in exhibition matches. In response to a reporter's questions of why Lithuanians are refusing to represent the Soviet Union, Marciulonis brought forward a strong message. I don't want to be an enemy of my own country. In the letter directed to Ted Turner, the four Lithuanian basketball players also wrote, "We're not politicians or soldiers, we're basketball players. Our mission is to raise awareness of Lithuania to the world."
With Lithuania now independent and every part of life in need of rework, the rebuild of Lithuania's basketball team started as well. To add, a recently independent nation which did not see sports as a major investment, it became clear that the national team would need help to represent the Lithuanian flag for the 1992 Olympics in Barcelona. Marciulonis, along with Donnie Nelson, son of the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, who Marciulonis played for in the NBA, set off on a tour looking for financial supporters. The funding eventually ended up coming from a very unusual source, an American rock band named the Grateful Dead. Bonnie Nelson has told interviewers the story about how they arranged a meeting with the band. Accompanied by Marcellonis, they knocked on the door of what looked like an abandoned garage. It all seemed strange, but yet all of the band members were there, and for some reason they were practicing Beatles tunes that day, even though it sounded mixed at times. A thick cloud of marijuana smoke was surrounding them, of course. At some point, Marcellonis turned over to Donnie Nelson and said, "Donnie, no way these guys are famous." Nelson responded and said that Marcellonis should trust him, and it turned out to be a good decision. The band ended up writing out a huge check and got their designer to send out a box of tie-dye t-shirts in red, yellow, and green, Lithuania's national colors. Jerry Garcia, lead vocalist and guitarist of the band, lit up a cigar and told Marcellonis, "You guys just took down one of the darkest political forces in history. Here's to freedom and celebration." With the available funding, the team could now focus on playing in international competition. The Grateful Dead supporting the Lithuanian national basketball team can be considered an insignificant event in large, but it symbolized the willingness to accept former Soviet republics into that aforementioned Western perception. An essential and eclectic West Coast hippie band ended up supporting Lithuania's claim for independence by just providing them with uniforms and resources to represent their nation. First major event that the Lithuanian team could now take part of was the Olympics of 1992. The United States had put together a dream team for the 1992 Olympics, including players such as Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, many others. This team was a direct response from the Americans to the Soviet Union's triumph in 1988. Lithuania was not expecting the semifinal matchup to be much of a competition, and they were right. The US defeated them 127 to 76. While the defeat may have looked bad on the scoreboard, the Lithuanians were already looking forward to a rematch against the unified team in the bronze medal match. Sarūnas Marčiulionis has said, "We didn't have any choice. We absolutely had to win at any cost." And they did. The Lithuanians came out on top with a score of 82 to 72, with a combined 50 points from Marčiulionis and Sabonis, the two stars of the team. Sabonis has said that the medal in Seoul in 1988 was gold, but the bronze in 1992 was their soul.
What the other dream team showed to the world in the 1992 Olympic Games was not only for victory or personal gain. The Lithuanian national team represented their entire nation and, in extension, all former Soviet republics at the same time. The spirit of the basketball team's efforts will forever be embedded in the foundation of one of the most talented basketball schools around the world. But what is embedded in that foundation is also an immense meaning of identity, of struggle and freedom. This should never be forgotten, especially to the people of the Baltic region and further.
This has been an episode of the series Sports and International Politics. It was made as part of Tallinn University's Life Project. Stay tuned on this channel for more videos like this one. Thank you.